Think of something that you know is true. That the Earth goes around the sun, for example, or that your blood circulates through your body because your heart pumps it, or that socks will never be able to live together in monogamous pairs. How do you feel when somebody tells you that you're wrong? Confused? Angry? But how did you know that it was right? Did you discover it yourself? Did a scientist on TV tell you? Or did you read it on the internet? I'm Timandra Harkness, and in this episode of How to Disagree, I'm looking for help in how to disagree about facts. I'm in Cambridge to find some people who are always disagreeing about facts. Scientists. I'm in the Guildhall in Cambridge. Big, beautiful old room with stained glass windows, and hundreds of scientists are making their way back in for the last session of the Exoplanets 2 conference.
Have a seat, thank you, coming back.
Exoplanets, in case you're wondering, are planets outside our own solar system, orbiting other stars.
Is that the discovery of exoplanets, what we're doing, resonates with the public in a profound way. And it's up to us to make sure that we lead them in the right direction. So, thank you.
My name's Deborah Fisher. I'm a professor of astronomy at Yale University, and I look for exoplanets.
Are there any tips that we could pick up from the way science does disagreements?
Yeah, I would like to see it be the same process, that people don't hang on in an emotional way to their picture of reality and truth, but they also allow good critical arguments to change their view. So none of us should feel bad that we were wrong about something. We should just feel excited that we have the chance to improve and learn something new.
That's a great thing to aim for. I don't know if I'm a good enough person to do that. I really hate being wrong.
I think that's the first thing you learn as a graduate student, is that you are probably going to be wrong, and that everybody's going to jump in and stomp all over your ideas, and that it's not personal, right? That it's about the science. So as long as you believe that it's for a greater truth, then I think you can feel comfortable with that.
Professor Fisher's model of how science handles disagreements over facts sounds ideal. It's the classical theory of how science works. But does empirical evidence support that model? At a semiochemistry conference elsewhere in Cambridge, they're discussing the meaning of sense, as in smells, and the personal habits of baboons.
Including my research assistant in France and you all. Thank you. Any questions?
Do baboons, do they have any behaviors in which they use naturally existing odorous materials actively in a behavioral way, as opposed to passively?
They don't, as far as we know, they don't do scent marking.
Stuart Firestein. I'm a professor of neurobiology at Columbia University in New York City. And right now we're in Cambridge, University of Cambridge, Gonville Keyes College. Is that right? Gonville and Keyes College.
What's the role of disagreement in science?
You know, that's what we do for a business, is disagree. Science is a structure that is intended to permit disagreement. So you can have, you know, really serious disagreements. I can remember going to meetings with people yelling and screaming at each other as to whether something was calcium or cyclic GMP. Just yelling at each other about this, that, or the other finding, and publishing this, publishing that. And finally it got sorted out, I suppose. But then they go to the bar and drink, you know, so, and that's the way it was supposed to work, that there's a relationship of respect in spite of how much you disagree with somebody. And the disagreement will not be catastrophic. The two camps that couldn't agree on calcium and cyclic GMP, the one that lost didn't lose their laboratories and have to go work at some other job altogether. They were still scientists, and they still had other questions to ask, and their laboratories went on. And if there's too big a price to pay for disagreeing, then of course people either won't disagree or will disagree quietly or subversively or this or that. And then all sorts of bad things come out of that.
So in that sense, it's not personal because you respect them as a person, but you don't agree with their work.
Yes, except that, to be honest, of course it's personal because we're people. And so we get quite heated about it because we care a great deal about what we do. It's not just a game. No, science is not a very peaceable practice at all. It never has been, as far as I can tell. And I don't think it should be.
I'm making a series about how to disagree. I think in principle, I think it's great. But if somebody proves to me that I'm wrong, in theory I like it, but in practice I hate it. Are scientists just really good people? Are scientists just like, no, thank you for disproving the theory that I've devoted 50 years of my life to.
I'm fortunate, I suppose, in not having that have happened to me yet, although things that I have put out have turned out to be superseded by other things. Not so much that what I did was wrong, but it was just a piece of the story, a little piece that we thought was a bigger piece than it really was. I'm happy for that in general.
How did you feel about it at the time, though? Come on, be honest.
Well, for that, I was quite happy. No, for that, I'm quite happy. I'm happy to see the field move on, and I see that there are still plenty of nice questions and things like that. And listen, it's also true that I'm senior enough that I don't give it. So probably can't say that. I'm senior enough that, it's not really going to affect me in a big way, right? So I can afford to be proven wrong much more easily than, say, a graduate student or a postdoc. But I agree, of course you like to be right, especially when you find something you think is really fabulous, and then it turns out to be a little less fabulous, or somebody's already thought of it, or something like that. Disappointment's been around a long time. It ain't going away.
On one level, then, we just have to grow a thicker skin and take disappointment as the price of discovery. But while we're in the domain of science, perhaps science itself can help us understand why we cling so hard to our ideas. Krista Mayer is a neuroscientist at King's College London.
When, as a scientist, you spend a lot of time researching an idea or a hypothesis or a theory, it becomes a part of you as a person. And when an experiment comes along, or usually when a colleague writes a paper that shows out that our beliefs are incorrect, it can be very difficult. And having asked many, particularly young scientists about this, I do get the feeling that maybe as many as 20% of all reviews that they're getting are unhelpfully trying to shoot down the paper. And often that will be because the paper says something that makes the reviewer feel cognitive dissonance about their own pet theory, which is a state when we discover that a deeply held belief that we have is incorrect, which makes us feel very confused, and it's like the bottom has fallen from under our feet. And that is a very distressing emotional state. And so often our brains will find a solution that allows us to carry on thinking that for the most fact we were actually right.
All of us, to some extent, do that all the time, don't we? We get an idea in our heads and then we work quite hard to hang on to that idea, even as evidence piles up that actually it was wrong.
Absolutely. Most of us do that most of the time, I would say.
I think I feel a bit better, knowing that I'm no worse than most people, and being able to call it cognitive dissonance instead of willful disregard of new evidence, or even sheer pig-headedness. Science is done by flawed human beings, but as a collective project, it has allowed us to understand how the world works to a sensational degree. Is this a method we could use more widely to resolve disagreements about facts, about what is true? Jonathan Rauch is a fellow at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C.
Every society has the fundamental problem of what you do about strong differences of belief. And the usual way of resolving that historically has been some form of either creed war, where people basically try to wipe out the viewpoint of the other side, or authoritarianism, or both. That is, the people who have the strength to impose their views on others, whether by force or by rule, do so. And that's been standard until about 300 or 400 years ago. The genius of the scientific revolution was not that it invented laboratories and technology. It's that it developed a decentralized, open-ended, rules-based system for settling differences of opinion. It said, look, you believe X, I believe Y. We're going to critique each other's views, and then we're going to submit our views to a large network of checkers. Basically, we export this function to a social network, the world's first and still greatest social network. And then we agree, usually more or less, to abide by the results without having a physical conflict. So science turns out to be a social process for resolving differences. It does that very cleverly. It tries to dissolve disagreements into empirical questions which can be tested. If it can't test them, then it debates them, and it allows them to go unresolved for long periods of time. That's part of the genius of science.
We both know that in the real world, scientists have really bitter disagreements, and it's not cool and calm and rational. There are personal rivalries. There are people who hang on to their theories in spite of every argument. Is what you're describing a kind of Platonic ideal of science rather than science itself?
In a way, it's the opposite. Bias and dogmatism and stubbornness are part of the fuel that gives science its energy. You don't want people to walk into the room not feeling strongly convinced of things. All that you want is that they submit their views to checking by other people, and then you harness the energy of their certainty and their biases and their disagreements. You know, the great sociologist of science, David Hull, once said that there is no better motivation in science than the desire to get that son of a bitch.
So it doesn't require us to be better people at all.
No, that's the genius of all these liberal systems. You know, science doesn't ask us to be perfect cognitive machines. The process is one of persuasion. I talk about not the marketplace of ideas, which is the standard cliche, but the marketplace of persuasion, because the rule in science is your idea doesn't get accepted unless a lot of other people wind up being persuaded. This is not always a benign and easy process, being criticized. Science is much more civil than the alternatives, but it's still hard, and it always will be. It can be quite bruising, and that's part of it.
Are there some principles that we could take from what you call liberal science and say these are principles that we should be pursuing in public discourse more generally?
Always be suspicious of ad hominem attacks. Go after the argument, not the person. And if you hear someone going after the person, calling names, then science has a good way of dealing with that. We call it marginalizing. Obnoxious people are pushed to the edges. Learn to be suspicious of yourself. Just feeling certain you're right doesn't make you right. In fact, it very likely makes you wrong. The discipline of science is it forces us to go out and check. It may not persuade us that we're wrong, but it forces to expose our views to other people, and that remains a very good lesson. Test yourself.
You can have questions checked by a community, and everyone in good faith may be trying to get closer to the truth, but is there any guarantee that that process actually will get us closer to the truth?
Well, in any particular case, there is never any guarantee of anything. In the larger picture, I would give you the last 400 years, 500 years, let's say since the time of Galileo. Liberal science has the most successful record of any social system in history.
Steer clear of personal attacks, test yourself, and accept that you will sometimes be wrong. 3 principles we can take from the domain of science into our disagreements about how the world is.